The woman in the tailored navy suit froze when she saw the homeless young woman quietly returning a wallet stuffed with thousands of dollars to the elderly man who had accidentally dropped it. She expected desperation. She found honesty instead. What happened after that single act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Every morning before sunrise, 24-year-old Emily Harper folded the worn blanket she slept under behind an abandoned bookstore on Maple Street. She made sure no trace of her presence remained. It wasn't because anyone had asked her to. It was because she believed that even when life stripped away everything you owned, it should never take away your dignity. The cold pavement had become more familiar than any bed she could remember. She stretched her stiff back, rubbed warmth into her hands, and smiled faintly as the first rays of sunlight painted the city skyline gold. One more day, she whispered to herself. Emily carried everything she owned in an old faded backpack. Inside were 2 changes of clothes, a notebook filled with charcoal sketches, a tiny sewing kit, and a photograph of her parents taken years before the accident that had claimed both their lives. Most people who hurried past her every day never noticed the notebook. They never knew the remarkable talent hidden inside its weathered pages. After losing her parents at 16, Emily had bounced between foster homes before aging out of the system. She worked every job she could find, restaurants, grocery stores, warehouses, but medical bills after a workplace injury eventually forced her into homelessness. Still, she never begged. Instead, she earned whatever she could by cleaning sidewalks outside small businesses before opening hours or helping elderly neighbors carry groceries without expecting payment. Some mornings she found enough loose change for breakfast. Some mornings she didn't. Yet every evening, she somehow managed to save a few crumbs of bread for the flock of pigeons that gathered near the city fountain. "They're hungry too," she would say. That morning was no different. Emily had just finished sweeping leaves away from the entrance of a neighborhood bakery when the owner stepped outside. "You've done it again," Mrs. Lawson smiled. Emily shrugged. "The wind keeps bringing them back. So do you." Mrs. Lawson handed her a warm cinnamon roll. "I can't pay much." "You already have." Emily accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." She didn't devour it. Instead, she broke it in half. A little boy sitting nearby with his exhausted mother stared at the pastry. Emily walked over and handed him the larger piece. His eyes widened. "For me?" She nodded. "You look hungrier than I am." His mother wiped away tears. "You didn't have to." Emily smiled. Kindness costs less than regret. Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. Later that afternoon, Emily sat beneath an old oak tree sketching buildings across the street. People often assumed she was simply scribbling. They never realized her drawings looked like professional architectural illustrations. Every window, every brick, every shadow, captured with breathtaking precision. As she focused on the page, an elderly gentleman hurried across the busy plaza. In his rush, a thick leather wallet slipped from his coat pocket without him noticing. Several people walked past it. One man even glanced down before pretending he hadn't seen it. Emily noticed immediately. She picked it up. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, several credit cards, and what appeared to be a retirement savings withdrawal receipt. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. That money could rent an apartment, buy clothes, change everything. For just one moment, she imagined what life would feel like if she simply disappeared. No one would know. No one except herself. Emily closed the wallet. Then she ran. "Sir." The elderly man kept walking. "Sir. You dropped something." He turned slowly. Confused. Emily reached him, breathing heavily. "I think this belongs to you." The man's hands trembled as he opened the wallet. Nothing was missing. His eyes filled with disbelief. I I thought it was gone. You should check everything. He counted quickly. Every dollar remained. You could have kept this. Emily smiled gently. But then it wouldn't belong to me. From across the street. Someone had witnessed every second. Victoria Bennett. Founder and CEO of one of the city's largest interior design companies. Worth millions. Accustomed to people impressing her for opportunity. But this young homeless woman had no audience. She believed no one was watching. And yet she had chosen honesty over survival. Victoria couldn't stop staring. She watched Emily quietly walk away without asking for a reward. Without expecting praise. Without looking back. For the first time in years. Victoria cancelled her next meeting. Something told her that walking away now would be the biggest mistake of her life. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. Victoria Bennett rarely changed her schedule for anyone. Her calendar was planned weeks in advance. Meetings with investors. Client presentations. Charity galas. Interviews. Every minute had a purpose. Yet as she watched Emily disappear down Maple Street with nothing but her faded backpack and quiet dignity, none of those appointments seemed nearly as important. She climbed out of the back seat of her luxury sedan. "Cancel my afternoon," she told her assistant. The assistant blinked. "Ma'am, your board meeting starts in 40 minutes. It can wait." Victoria walked toward the young woman. Emily had stopped beside the public fountain, kneeling to refill a small bottle of water. She splashed some into a shallow crack in the pavement where two thirsty sparrows immediately began drinking. Victoria smiled to herself. Even now. She was thinking about someone else. "Excuse me." Emily turned quickly, instinctively taking a small step backward. Years of living on the streets had taught her to be cautious. "Can I help you?" Victoria noticed there wasn't a trace of fear in her voice. Only politeness. "I couldn't help seeing what you did back there." Emily looked confused. "The wallet? You returned thousands of dollars." Emily shrugged as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "It wasn't mine." Victoria studied her face. "You didn't even hesitate." Emily smiled softly. "I did." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "You did?" Emily nodded honestly. For a moment. Silence hung between them. "I thought about what that money could do." Her eyes drifted toward the sidewalk. "I imagined sleeping indoors, eating without worrying about tomorrow, maybe buying new shoes." Victoria looked down. Emily's sneakers were splitting open at the sides. Rainwater had stained the fabric permanently. "But then," Emily continued, "I realized if I kept it, I'd lose the only thing I still own." "And what's that?" "My character." The words landed heavily. Victoria had spent years listening to polished speeches from executives and politicians. None had moved her as much as this simple sentence. "My name is Victoria." "Emily. It's nice to meet you." "You too." Victoria hesitated before asking gently. "Would you let me buy you lunch?" Emily immediately shook her head. "I appreciate it, but I don't want charity." Victoria smiled. "What if it isn't charity?" Emily looked puzzled. "What if it's simply one human thanking another?" For the first time, Emily smiled without reservation. "I suppose that's different." A few minutes later they sat in a quiet family-owned cafe. Emily looked uncomfortable. She carefully wiped her hands with a napkin before touching the menu. I don't want to dirty anything. Victoria's heart ached. Emily. It's okay. Emily laughed awkwardly. You'd be surprised how often people assume someone without a home has forgotten basic manners. The waitress approached. What can I get you? Emily scanned the menu before pointing to the least expensive sandwich. I'll have this, please. Victoria noticed. Actually, she interrupted gently, bring her your house special. Emily quickly protested. That's too much. No. Victoria smiled warmly. It's exactly enough. When the meals arrived, Emily stared at the plate for several seconds. Fresh bread. Roasted vegetables. Soup. Fruit. She whispered almost to herself. It smells incredible. Victoria expected her to eat immediately. Instead, Emily asked quietly. Could I have a box? The waitress nodded. Of course. Victoria looked confused. Is something wrong? Emily smiled. I'd like to save half for tonight. Victoria swallowed hard. No one should have to think that way. Emily answered with surprising peace. You learn to appreciate every meal when you don't know when the next one is coming. As they ate, conversation became easier. Victoria learned that Emily loved drawing. She had dreamed of becoming an architect as a little girl. My dad used to buy me sketchbooks every birthday. What happened? Emily's smile faded. My parents were killed by a drunk driver. I'm so sorry. I spent years believing life was over. She paused. Eventually I realized grief doesn't disappear. It changes shape. Victoria nodded quietly. I understand that better than you think. Emily looked surprised. Victoria rarely spoke about her late husband. He passed away from cancer 8 years ago. Emily lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. There are days when my house still feels unbearably empty. Neither woman spoke for a while. Sometimes shared pain needs no explanation. Finally Emily reached into her backpack. I want to show you something. She carefully removed the worn notebook. Victoria opened it. Then another page. Then another. Her breathing slowed. The drawings weren't ordinary sketches. They were extraordinary. Detailed building concepts. Interior layouts. Parks. Libraries. Entire neighborhoods designed with beauty and purpose. Every page revealed imagination far beyond amateur talent. Victoria looked up. You created all of these? Emily nodded shyly. I draw whenever I can. Did anyone teach you? No. Victoria turned another page. The perspective. The lighting. The technical precision. She had hired graduates from prestigious universities whose portfolios weren't nearly this impressive. This, Victoria whispered, is remarkable. Emily laughed nervously. It's just a hobby. No. Victoria looked directly into her eyes. This is a gift. Emily looked away. Dreams don't pay rent. They can. Emily smiled sadly. Not for someone like me. Victoria leaned forward. Who told you that? Emily hesitated. Life. Before Victoria could answer, a loud voice interrupted them. Emily. Both women turned. It was Carl, another homeless man who often stayed near the train station. He looked anxious. The city workers cleared out the alley. Emily's face fell. My things. They threw away almost everything. Emily closed her eyes. My blanket? Carl nodded slowly. Gone. The backpack I left. I'm sorry. Victoria watched Emily sit silently. No tears. No anger. Just quiet acceptance. As if disappointment had become too familiar to fight anymore. "I'm sorry," Carl whispered. Emily forced a small smile. "It's not your fault." Carl noticed Victoria. "I'll leave you too." As he walked away, Victoria spoke softly. "You've lost everything again." Emily looked out the cafe window. "Not everything." "What do you mean?" Emily tapped the sketchbook resting on the table. "I still have this." Victoria realized Emily had carried it with her everywhere. Not because it was valuable. Because it held hope. She closed the notebook carefully. Then she made a decision that would change both of their lives. "Emily." "Yes." "I'd like you to come by my office tomorrow." Emily frowned. "Why?" "I think it's time someone finally gave your talent a chance." Emily stared at her, unsure whether to believe what she had just heard. People had made promises before. Most disappeared by morning. Victoria noticed the uncertainty in her eyes. "I know trust isn't easy," she said gently. "You don't have to believe in me today." Emily swallowed. "Then why are you helping me?" Victoria smiled with tears beginning to form. "Because today, when you had every reason to choose yourself, you chose kindness instead." Emily looked down at her worn hands. For the first time in many years. Someone wasn't seeing a homeless woman. Someone was seeing her. Emily barely slept that night. Not because she was uncomfortable. She was used to sleeping on hard pavement. It was hope that kept her awake. Hope was unfamiliar. Hope was dangerous. Too many promises had dissolved with the morning sun. She replayed Victoria's words over and over. "I think it's time someone finally gave your talent a chance." By sunrise, Emily had almost convinced herself not to go. "What if she's changed her mind?" she whispered. "What if yesterday was just pity?" She stood outside Victoria Bennett Designs for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the glass entrance. Employees in tailored suits hurried inside carrying coffee cups and laptops. Every reflection in the polished windows reminded Emily how out of place she looked. Her jacket was faded. Her shoes were falling apart. Her backpack had been stitched together so many times that the fabric looked like a patchwork quilt. She turned to leave. Just then, the front doors opened. "Emily." Victoria hurried down the steps herself. "I was wondering if you'd come." "You, remembered." Victoria smiled warmly. "I've been waiting for you." Several employees exchanged puzzled glances. They had never seen their CEO personally greet anyone at the entrance. Especially not someone who appeared homeless. Victoria noticed the looks but ignored them completely. "Come inside." Emily hesitated. "I don't think I belong here." Victoria answered gently. "Sometimes we don't realize where we belong until someone opens the door." For the first time in years. Emily walked through the entrance of an office building not as a cleaner or delivery worker, but as a welcomed guest. Inside, the elegant lobby sparkled with marble floors and towering plants. Emily instinctively looked down at her worn shoes. "I'm going to make your floor dirty." Victoria laughed softly. "Emily, floors can be cleaned. Hearts are much harder to repair." They entered the design studio. Large blueprints covered every table. Three-dimensional models lined the shelves. Designers worked quietly at computer stations. Emily's eyes lit up like a child entering a toy store. She couldn't stop looking around. "This is beautiful." Victoria noticed the wonder on her face. "Would you like to see our newest project?" Emily nodded eagerly. Victoria spread architectural drawings across a large table. "We've been struggling with this community center. Something feels empty." Emily studied the plans in silence. She didn't speak for almost 5 minutes. Finally she asked, May I? Victoria handed her a pencil. Emily carefully began sketching. She adjusted the entrance. Added larger windows. Created a reading garden beside the building. Included wheelchair-accessible pathways that blended naturally into the landscape instead of looking like afterthoughts. She even designed a children's art courtyard where families could gather. Employees gradually stopped working. One by one. They gathered around the table. Nobody spoke. Emily erased, redrew, shaded, and explained each idea with quiet confidence. When people enter a building, she said softly, they shouldn't just feel welcomed. She paused. They should feel like they matter. The room fell completely silent. Victoria looked around. Her senior designers, people with decades of experience, were staring at Emily in amazement. Finally one of them whispered. "Why didn't we think of that?" Another nodded. "She's absolutely right." Victoria smiled. "I knew it." But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. As Emily left the room to wash her hands, one executive approached Victoria. His name was Richard Sloan, the company's operations director. He lowered his voice. "This is a mistake." Victoria folded her arms. "Is it? We can't have someone like her walking around the office." "What exactly do you mean by, someone like her?" Richard sighed. "She's homeless. So. Our clients expect professionalism." Victoria's expression hardened. "I hired professionals based on talent." Richard shook his head. "This could damage our reputation." Victoria answered without hesitation. "No, Richard." She looked toward the hallway where Emily had disappeared. "What damages reputations is judging people by circumstances instead of character." Richard walked away, unconvinced. Emily returned, unaware of the conversation. Victoria introduced her to the design team. Most welcomed her warmly. Others offered polite smiles. A few avoided eye contact altogether. Emily noticed. She had seen those expressions countless times before. Later that afternoon, Victoria invited Emily into her office. "I'd like to offer you something." Emily tensed. "A job?" "Eventually." Emily's eyes widened. "But first." Victoria handed her an envelope. Inside was information about a scholarship program and a short-term housing arrangement funded through Victoria's charitable foundation. Emily stared silently. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because I haven't earned it." Victoria leaned forward. "Emily. You've spent years earning opportunities no one ever offered you." Tears filled Emily's eyes. "I don't want anyone thinking I was given special treatment." "You aren't." Victoria smiled. "You were given a chance." Emily looked down. "There's a difference." Days turned into weeks. Emily attended design workshops every morning. She studied late into the night. She absorbed everything like someone making up for lost years. Slowly, the office changed too. Employees who had once doubted her began asking for her opinions. Designers sought her feedback before finalizing projects. One afternoon, the receptionist smiled as Emily walked in. "Good morning." Emily smiled back. It was such a simple greeting. Yet it almost brought her to tears. For so long. She had been invisible. Now people knew her name. But just when everything seemed to be falling into place. The past returned. Emily received a letter from the shelter where she had been temporarily staying. Funding had been cut. Residents had 1 week to leave. She would be homeless again. That same evening, another obstacle appeared. Victoria called an emergency board meeting. Richard had convinced several board members that helping Emily was becoming a distraction from the company's mission. Some investors questioned Victoria's judgment. Others suggested ending the scholarship entirely. It's becoming a public relations risk, one board member argued. Victoria looked around the room. So honesty is a risk? No one answered. Compassion is bad for business? Silence. Richard finally spoke. This company cannot solve everyone's problems. Victoria nodded. No. It can't. But it can refuse to ignore someone standing right in front of us. Despite her passionate defense, the board delayed further funding until they could review the situation. When Emily learned what had happened, guilt overwhelmed her. She knocked quietly on Victoria's office door. I'm sorry. Victoria looked up. For what? For causing all of this. You didn't. If I disappear. Victoria interrupted firmly. No. Emily's voice trembled. Maybe everyone's right. They're not. I'm making your life harder. Victoria stood and walked around the desk. She placed both hands gently on Emily's shoulders. Listen to me. Emily looked up. The easiest thing I could do right now, Victoria said quietly, would be to walk away. A tear rolled down Emily's cheek. But kindness isn't measured by what we do when it's easy. She smiled. It's measured by what we choose when it's difficult. Emily finally broke down crying. Years of loneliness. Disappointment. Rejection. All poured out at once. For the first time since losing her parents. She wasn't crying because she had no one. She was crying because someone had chosen to stay. Outside the office, unnoticed by either of them, several employees had overheard the conversation. And one by one, they began wondering how they could help. The following Monday, something extraordinary happened. Emily arrived at the office expecting another difficult day. Instead, she found nearly every employee gathered in the conference room. She stopped in the doorway, confused. Did I come at the wrong time? Victoria smiled. No. Richard stood quietly at the back of the room, saying nothing. Victoria stepped forward. This meeting is for you. Emily looked even more confused. For me? Victoria nodded. Last week reminded us that kindness doesn't belong to one person. It grows when other people decide to join in. She gestured toward the long conference table. It wasn't covered with blueprints. It was covered with gifts. A new backpack. Professional drawing supplies. Architecture textbooks. A laptop. Warm winter clothing. A set of apartment keys resting inside a small wooden box. Emily covered her mouth. What is all this? The receptionist spoke first. We all pitched in. One designer smiled. I donated the laptop. Another employee laughed. I figured every great architect needs better pencils than the tiny ones you've been carrying around. Carl, the maintenance supervisor, held up a toolbox. I built you a drafting table over the weekend. Emily's knees nearly gave out. Victoria gently supported her. But, Emily whispered, I can't repay any of this. An older designer smiled warmly. You already have. Emily looked at him. You reminded us why we became designers. Another employee added. You make us think about people before buildings. The room filled with quiet applause. Even Richard remained silent. Later that afternoon, Victoria drove Emily to a small but beautiful apartment. It wasn't luxurious. But it was clean. Bright. Safe. Sunlight poured through the windows. Emily stood frozen in the doorway. This. She couldn't finish the sentence. Victoria handed her the keys. It's yours. Emily slowly stepped inside. She touched the kitchen counter. Opened a cabinet. Ran her fingers across the windowsill. Finally, she walked into the bedroom. There was a neatly made bed. White sheets. A soft blanket. A reading lamp beside it. Emily sat down carefully, almost afraid the room might disappear. Then she leaned back. For the first time in nearly 6 years. She lay on a real bed. Tears streamed down both cheeks. I forgot what this feels like. Victoria quietly sat beside her. You never have to sleep on the street again. Emily turned toward her. I don't know how to thank you. Victoria smiled. Promise me something instead. Anything. When life gives you the chance. She gently squeezed Emily's hand. Do for someone else what others have done for you. Emily nodded through tears. I promise. Months passed. Emily flourished. She enrolled in an accelerated architectural design program with the scholarship Victoria had arranged. Her instructors were amazed. One professor called her portfolio the work of someone who sees not just structures, but the people who live inside them. Victoria proudly displayed those words in her office. Soon afterward, Victoria announced something unexpected. The company had won the contract to redesign an abandoned neighborhood into affordable family housing and community spaces. During the first planning meeting, Victoria stood before the entire staff. I've selected the lead designer for our community center. Everyone looked around the room. Victoria smiled. Emily Harper. The room erupted in applause. Emily looked completely stunned. I can't. Victoria laughed softly. You already can. You've been doing it from the day we met. Even Richard stood and applauded. After weeks of watching Emily work, he had finally admitted something to himself. He had judged her without ever knowing her. When the meeting ended, he approached her quietly. I owe you an apology. Emily looked surprised. For what? I saw your circumstances. He lowered his eyes. I never bothered to see you. Emily smiled gently. We all get second chances. Richard nodded. Thank you for giving me one. Construction began. Emily poured her heart into every detail. She designed wide sidewalks for elderly residents. Playgrounds where children of every ability could play together. Gardens filled with flowers instead of fences. Reading corners beneath shaded trees. Murals painted by local students. When reporters asked why the project felt so different, Emily answered with a smile. A building should never simply give people shelter. It should remind them they belong. The interview spread across social media. Thousands of people shared her story. Scholarship organizations reached out. Universities invited her to speak. Charities asked for her advice on designing spaces for vulnerable families. But the moment that meant the most to Emily came months later. One rainy evening, she noticed a young woman sitting alone outside the same abandoned bookstore where she had once slept. The girl couldn't have been older than 19. She held a torn backpack and stared at the sidewalk with hopeless eyes. Emily quietly walked over carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Mind if I sit here? The young woman shrugged. I guess. Emily handed her one of the cups. For me. Emily smiled. I've learned hot chocolate tastes better when it's shared. The young woman laughed for the first time in days. My name's Lily. I'm Emily. They talked for over an hour. Emily listened more than she spoke. When Lily admitted she had nowhere to go, Emily didn't look away. Instead, she reached into her bag and handed Lily a business card. On it was the logo of a new nonprofit organization. The Harper Hope Foundation. What is this? Lily asked. Emily smiled. A place where people get more than a roof. They get another chance. Lily looked at her with tears in her eyes. Why would you help someone you don't even know? Emily looked across the street toward the cafe where Victoria had once bought her lunch. Then she smiled. Because one person believed I was worth helping before I believed it myself. A few days later, the community center officially opened. Families filled the gardens. Children laughed across the playground. Senior citizens relaxed beneath the trees Emily had insisted on planting. Victoria stood beside Emily as the ribbon was cut. "You've changed this neighborhood." Emily shook her head. "No." She looked at the crowd. "We changed it." Victoria smiled proudly. "You kept your promise." Emily looked at the families enjoying the place she had once only dreamed of creating. Then she quietly replied, "No. I simply passed kindness forward." As the sun began to set, Emily noticed an elderly man accidentally drop his wallet near the entrance. Before she could move, a little boy picked it up. He ran after the man and returned it without hesitation. Emily smiled. The ripple had already begun. This story shows how one act of kindness can change everything. What's one way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Challenge yourself and share your commitment in the comments. A year later, Maple Street looked very different. The abandoned buildings had become colorful community spaces. The once forgotten neighborhood now echoed with children's laughter, local musicians, and families gathering in parks that hadn't existed before. But perhaps the greatest transformation wasn't the street itself. It was the people who walked through it. Emily Harper had become one of the city's youngest and most admired community designers. Newspapers called her an inspiring architect. Universities invited her to speak about resilience. Local businesses proudly partnered with the Harper Hope Foundation, which now provided temporary housing, career counseling, scholarships, and mentorship for people experiencing homelessness. Yet anyone who met Emily quickly discovered something remarkable. Success had changed her circumstances. It had never changed her heart. Every Friday evening, no matter how busy her schedule became, she returned to Mrs. Lawson's little bakery. Not as a customer. As a volunteer. Together, they packed fresh bread and pastries into boxes for shelters across the city. Mrs. Lawson smiled as she watched Emily carefully arrange each loaf. "You still break the biggest piece in half." Emily laughed. "Old habits." "No." Mrs. Lawson corrected gently. "Beautiful habits." Across town, Victoria Bennett's life had changed as well. Her company was thriving more than ever. Ironically, the very board members who had once questioned her decision now proudly showcased the firm's community-centered projects as examples of compassionate innovation. Clients didn't just admire the buildings. They admired the values behind them. Victoria often smiled when she remembered that afternoon outside the fountain. She had believed she was stopping to help a stranger. Instead, she had found a friend who reminded her what success was truly meant to accomplish. At one board meeting, Richard stood before the leadership team. "I'd like to propose something." The room became quiet. "I think every internship we offer should include opportunities for young people who have faced homelessness, foster care, or severe hardship." Several members nodded immediately. Richard smiled. "I spent years believing resumes told us everything." He glanced toward Emily, who was attending as a guest consultant. "I've never been happier to discover how wrong I was." The proposal passed unanimously. Meanwhile, Carl found steady employment as facilities manager for the Harper Hope Foundation. When people asked how he got the job, he always laughed. "I knew the boss before she became famous." Lily, the young woman Emily had met outside the abandoned bookstore, was now studying social work. She often visited schools, sharing her story with teenagers who felt invisible. Whenever someone thanked her for her encouragement, she gave the same answer. "I only learned hope because someone shared theirs with me." The ripple continued to spread. One act of kindness had become hundreds. Then thousands. One crisp autumn morning, Emily stood once again beneath the old oak tree where she had once sketched buildings while wondering if anyone would ever notice her. Children now sat beneath its branches with notebooks and colored pencils. The city had transformed the space into a free outdoor art program sponsored by the Harper Hope Foundation. Emily walked among the students, encouraging each one. A little girl nervously held up her drawing. "It's not very good." Emily smiled as she remembered saying something similar years ago. She knelt beside the girl. "Can I tell you a secret?" The child nodded. "Every masterpiece begins as a sketch." The little girl smiled and picked up her pencil again. Nearby, Victoria watched quietly. "You've become exactly who I hoped you'd be." Emily shook her head. "No." She looked around at the children laughing together. "I became who someone believed I could be." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "And now you're helping others believe in themselves." Emily looked toward the community center, where families gathered for a weekend festival. Some were former shelter residents. Some were volunteers. Some had once been strangers. Now they were neighbors. Friends. A community. She remembered the cold mornings behind the abandoned bookstore. The nights when she wasn't sure she would eat. The loneliness of feeling invisible. Those memories hadn't disappeared. They had become reminders. Reminders never to overlook the person standing quietly in the corner. Never to judge someone by the clothes they wore. Never to assume that a difficult season defined an entire life. Because sometimes, the person carrying the heaviest burden is also carrying the greatest potential. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of someone else's miracle. The truth is, not everyone can donate thousands of dollars. Not everyone can start a foundation. Not everyone can build a community center. But every one of us can offer a smile. A listening ear. A warm meal. A word of encouragement. A second chance. Kindness doesn't ask how much you have. It simply asks whether you're willing to care. Somewhere today, someone is waiting for a reason to believe that people are still good. You could be that reason. You could be the person who notices what everyone else overlooks. You could be the beginning of a story that someone tells for the rest of their life. Because changing the world doesn't always start with a grand gesture. Sometimes, it begins with returning a wallet. Buying a stranger lunch. Opening a door. Or simply choosing to see the person everyone else has ignored. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary kindness exists all around us. If this touched your heart, please like this video. It helps more people discover these inspiring stories. Subscribe for more tales of human kindness that will restore your faith in humanity. And most importantly, look for opportunities in your own life to be someone's unexpected blessing. What act of kindness will you perform this week? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, you have the power to change someone's entire world. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate what one compassionate choice can set in motion. Because the greatest legacy we leave behind isn't the wealth we accumulate or the titles we earn. It's the lives we change, one kind act at a time.